Good morning, Karen. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm very excited about today's session. I'm particularly excited that many of you attending our webinar today are not really familiar with DevOps, that you have some familiarity or you're not familiar with the Phoenix Project, and certainly I'm very excited about being able to be able to bring that to you. So that's great. What we're going to do to get started is just to level set the knowledge that you might have about DevOps. And so I'm just going to do a little bit of a presentation that talks about what DevOps is and why DevOps is important now. Why has this suddenly become something of interest to the IT market as well? And as Karen said, in my background, I'm an old IT director, started in IT in the late 80s, have seen the evolution. I'm sure many of you have as well. And so as IT has started to become a competitive advantage for organizations, how we grew up, and we're a fairly young industry, how we grew up and the benefits we bring to our customers and to our businesses has also grown exponentially. And so let's just take a little exploration in terms of what DevOps is and why it's not only become important now, but why in many organizations it's almost critical. So we'll start with a definition. DevOps is a cultural and professional movement. So despite what your research may tell you, at the heart of DevOps, first and foremost, is a change in the way IT and the business think about each other in terms of how IT behaves internally, in terms of the flow of work between development from concept into production and beyond. So it's a cultural and professional movement. It does stress communication, it stresses collaboration, it stresses integration between software developers and IT operations professionals. So on its face, DevOps is being the interest in DevOps has risen mostly because communication, collaboration, and integration between software developers and IT operation professionals has not always been smooth, right? The flow of work, the investment in different frameworks and different practices, the vocabularies. IT is a very, very siloed business unit within most organizations, and that's just because we're an organization of specialists, right? So I'm not a developer. I come from the operations world. Many developers are not operational people, so helping us to cross-pollinate that knowledge is very, very important. And if you look at the first bullet, that's, I think, the driving mechanism behind DevOps. The demand for quality software products and services has accelerated. It's not only accelerated, it's being driven in many ways by what's happening in mobile and what's happening in cloud and what's happening in many organizations, so that the 18-month traditional project, while still may occur, may not necessarily be the norm anymore. It does acknowledge that there's an interdependence between the functions. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. We do need to make some cultural improvements, but the next bullet, I think, is the most important aspect of DevOps, and that's that it builds on investments that IT has already made in other practices. Practices like Agile software development, practices like ITIL or IT service management, practices like Lean or Lean Six Sigma that many businesses have invested in. So DevOps is going to sit on top of those investments in training and consultancies and practices, all of which were done with the hopes of being able to accelerate the production of IT services in a very high quality way. So again, DevOps, I like to think of DevOps as a super framework that sits on top of that. It does encourage the use of automation, and unfortunately, when you do a lot of research about DevOps, there's so many different perspectives in terms of what DevOps is and what it isn't. There are those that call it no-ops, and that the intent is that it's pure automation. Or there are those that believe it's purely cultural, or that it's purely about Agile. And the answer is it's none of the above. It's not only about culture, and it's not only about automation, and it's not only about Agile or ITIL or how they all play together. It is all of the above. It's really taking an end-to-end approach to the IT supply chain, whether your supply chain is entirely in-house, if your supply chain involves suppliers, or or members of your organization that are offshore in other countries. It's really looking at the end-to-end flow of work from development into production. And of course, that's not a one-size-fits-all. It's not every change, every release is exactly the same, but it does look at release cycles in terms of, are the release cycles for critical applications meeting the need of your customer? So it doesn't necessarily imply you're going to deploy 50 times a day, or that you're going to take 250,000 metrics, and you might have seen presentations about that. It may mean that if you release a critical service once a year, maybe now it's twice a year, or maybe it's once a quarter, or maybe it's once a month, or maybe it's staged in a continuous way. You might hear the term continuous delivery, so that it is available to be released as and when needed. So all of those are components of DevOps. It's not a single practice. It doesn't supersede Agile. It doesn't supersede ITIL. Right? It doesn't signal the death of ITIL or Agile or Scrum or Lean or anything like that. It connects the dots between all of the practices within all of the different units, line management, specialties within IT, from your providers all the way through to production. So what's the goal? The goal of DevOps, first and foremost, is to be able to align IT and the business better, to give IT a better capability of responsiveness. Those of you coming from the ITIL space know that that's always been one of the goals of service management, right? IT business alignment. We called it IT business integration for a while. We want to be able to release faster, and as I just said, the release cycle is a very important element of DevOps, but faster doesn't mean that we sacrifice quality. It means that we do become a little bit more comfortable with automation, and we do look at change models as an example so that we could do more standard changes and look at how that pipeline between development and production and what's being released is under consideration. But it's also looking at some of the processes, particularly service management processes, and how we make those more agile as well. The goal of DevOps is to improve time to market. It's to maintain and improve the quality of code, the quality of products, the quality of services, being able to improve productivity. DevOps equals efficiency. So if we're removing some of the constraints that have held us up in the past, sometimes that's that big gap between development, throwing it over the wall, and operation being able to bring it into production and maintain it, that increases efficiency. If we're more efficient and we're increasing our time to market and the quality of our code and the quality of our services, employee and customer satisfaction increase. So it's all good, right? It's all good. Less waste, fewer defects, lower long-term costs. I mean, who doesn't want that in a business? Who doesn't want that in an IT environment? And while it may sound like nirvana, again, as I said a minute ago, it's not only about culture. You can't wave a magic wand and change your culture. It's a combination of many, many elements, and it's really bringing together a lot of what IT is already doing, and then injecting aspects such as continuous delivery, where the organization is prepared to release, or the organization is analyzing its current release cycle and looking at where the constraints are, and improving the share of knowledge between operational teams and development teams to improve collaboration. You know, that term's an interesting term. Collaboration isn't just that we work together, it's that we ask each other's opinion, and we move our way forward from there. Some of the practices that are DevOps practices, again, it's not only about Agile, and it's not only about the continuous set of practices, but it's a little bit of all of these. Certainly, Agile software development, Agile service management are important elements to the success of DevOps, right? We start to work in more of an iterative way, an incremental way, so smaller, more frequent releases, smaller, more frequent introduction of process. Continuous integration, where you have many developers working on the same product simultaneously, and they commit the code that they've done today to a central continuous integration server that's tested on a regular basis, that's integrated into potentially small releases as necessary. So it's many working to produce a single unit of work. I just mentioned continuous delivery. That's a very, very common theme and a common practice that's emerging in DevOps, where organizations are looking at their delivery pipelines, and they're looking at it from, again, the first piece of code all the way through production, and setting up staging environments so that what's in the staging environment is available to be released when and as needed. Doesn't mean it has to be released, but it's available as and when needed. Continuous testing. If you're doing continuous integration, then the ability to continuously test instead of in the old waterfall ways where we waited and tested at the end. And then the ability to continuously deploy if that's what your organization needs. And there are many that do, particularly those with web presence, where they may be continuously deploying 5 lines of code several times a day. So it depends on the nature of your organization, the nature of your business, and the nature of your customers. Many don't think of ITIL or ITSM as DevOps practices, but can you actually look at your release cycle without looking at change management or looking at release management or having some leg into incident management, because what happens after it goes into production, and being able to assess problems so that as we're continuing the release cycle, that's important as well. So ITIL and ITSM very much are continuous, right? Continuous service improvement is at the heart of ITIL, and if we can scale those processes to enable a faster flow of work, then those processes will be a pathway, not necessarily an obstacle. Lean, the ability to reduce waste and defects and be more efficient with fewer resources. There's a lot of interest in Lean right now. And if you're not familiar with a Kanban board, a very simple way to look at work in progress and actually assessing what's getting done. I mean, that's a big concept in the Agile world, is getting things done. Isn't that for all of us? But looking at Kanban boards and how we can leverage the capability of a very, very simple, deceptively simple approach to be able to improve that flow of work as well. DevOps is not looking to reinvent frameworks. I like to say that IT, we love our frameworks. And DevOps is not meant to supersede or to invalidate or to eliminate any of the practices that IT is already doing. It's looking to scale. It's looking to make those practices more agile, but most importantly, it's looking to integrate those practices so that Dev and Ops have a single mindset and a set of shared accountabilities. So why is it important now, right? I mean, IT's been in operation for a long time. We know that for the past 10, 15 years, there's been a lot of interest in IT service management, and certainly on the development side, there's been a lot of interest in Agile. So it's not as if IT hasn't been trying to improve on its own, but why is this concept of DevOps suddenly rising? Well, I think first, the competitor has changed. Regardless of what organization you're in, whether you're in a startup or you're in a 100-year-old titan in the industry, your competitor today is a young, nimble startup. So it could be 2 guys working in a garage, and when they've built their organization, they've built it with DevOps in mind. They don't understand the meaning of silo. And if you look at some of the, we call them unicorns, some of the startup organizations or young Web 2.0 organizations that really started the DevOps movements, and some have grown quite large. You look at organizations like Netflix, they've grown quite large. Your competitor is building a DevOps mentality into their corporate DNA and retrofitting it into a legacy organization that's very siloed and has an extensive supply chain is something you're going to need to do in order to stay competitive. I mentioned that Agile software development is increasing, and we can't operate in a silo anymore. We can't operate in the way that we've been operating for a long time, because that flow of work must increase in order to stay competitive. Certainly the move to the cloud and the ability that infrastructure is hosted somewhere else has driven that as well, because while that certainly removes some complexity to internal IT organizations, it also adds a level of complexity to IT organizations. On the consumer side, we have a very app mentality, right? With the introduction of tablets and Androids and iOS, everything's an app. There's an app for that. And apps seem to the consumer to be very, very simple, and maintaining the relevancy, the currency, the interactivity of an app requires that organizations move fast, right? The increase in web usage, the increase in e-commerce has certainly driven the fact that we need to be able to move fast. We need to be able to take risk. We need to be able to fail fast if that's what we need to do, but we also need to be able to recover fast. And so all of this just means that we have to be able to get to market faster, right? A lot of DevOps is about speed, but it's not sacrificing quality. So we have to learn to be more continuous, right? And as I said before, continuous integration, continuous testing, continuous deployment, continual service improvement is an important part of DevOps as well. So why should enterprises adopt DevOps? You know, as I just said, everything is moving very, very quickly. If you look at the absorption of technology, the Internet of Things, I mean, you know, your coffee maker is going to talk to the Internet. I saw something from Amazon the other day where they sell a button that you put on your washing machine, and when you're out of laundry soap, you press the button. It actually talks to the Amazon servers and will place an order for your favorite laundry soap to be delivered, you know, the next day or 2 hours, depending on where you are. That's the Internet of Things. I mean, the way things are moving in terms of the use of the Internet. I was on the Internet in the 80s. Boy, that was really different than it is right now. So to thrive, enterprises must do more than simply leverage technology. They have to be ready to deliver services when and how required, and they have to be able to adapt to the app mentality, the Internet of Things. They have to be able to improve that flow of work, because it's a lead, follow, or get out of the way type of approach right now, right? You have to be able to demonstrate your ability to adapt, and we can't do that using some of our, not even our old practices, but our old culture, where how we travel through the silos and how we travel through the suppliers was very, very different. So there's been some research over the past several years. Every year a State of DevOps report is produced by IT Revolution Press and some of their partners like Puppet Lab. And so again, about 2013, 2014, the number of respondents was fairly small. I think in 2015 it exceeded 10,000 respondents. And again, they come from all different vertical markets and really come from a lot of different places in terms of size and scope of their organization, but a couple of themes really emerged. Companies with high performance exceeded their goals of profitability, market share, and productivity, right? So they improved the practice. DevOps improved their performance, not only as IT, but improved their performance as a business. So therefore, we know that IT is a strong competitive advantage, but that's not enough. It's how we leverage the technology that helps to increase the profitability, market share, and productivity. The reports also demonstrated that internally, the IT organizations were 5 times more likely to be high performance. Now look at this. This is kind of interesting. Code was shipped 30 times faster. Deployments are completed 8,000 times faster. Now, your organization may not need to do that. Right? Your organization may not need to ship code 30 times faster or complete 8,000 times faster. Your organization may need to move slowly to graduate into this, or just the nature of your business may not necessarily require that. That's okay. It's about increasing your ability to release, however that increase happens and however gradually that happens. But the second major bullet is also important. Not only were we able to be more agile and to go faster, the services are more reliable, right? 50% fewer failures. So I mentioned fail fast. 50% fewer failures, service that's restored 12 times faster. And a lot of that is that integration, collaboration, communication between Dev and Ops, because a lot of the delay when we have an incident is communication. Who made the change? What was changed? How do we fix that change? So everything that's being deployed represents risk, but that risk is mitigated because we have tools like ChatOps, where chat rooms are left open and Dev and Ops are chatting with each other as deployments are occurring. So if something's noticed, an anomaly is noticed, it's noticed almost immediately, and action is taken almost immediately, and so we reduce some of that waste. DevOps really helps organizations meet 2 critical business needs. the ability to respond to urgent business needs. You have to be able to change fast. And while most businesses have that ability, you know, they can adapt their marketing, they can adapt their products, they can adapt their messaging, they can adapt their customer service. Being able to adapt their technical capabilities is as, if not more important. And then the ability to provide stable, reliable, and secure services. Secure obviously being an important aspect. Some call it DevSecOps because security is a key element. And if you've not read the Phoenix Project, you know, as Karen said, we certainly encourage you to do that. It's a novel. It's an actually really great read. You get to play which character do I think I am and which character do I hope I'm not. It's based on the book The Goal, but one of the messages that sits behind the Phoenix Project is security and the ability to release. The book revolves around the fact that there's a major critical service that has just met with repeated delays, and then being able to look at the processes that sit behind it and why that particular service has just not been able to be brought into successful production and all of the remnant pieces. And the characters are kind of interesting, and I said it's a really good read, but despite the fact that it's a novel, the messaging that comes out of the Phoenix Project is exactly this. How do we respond to the urgent business needs while still being able to provide stable, reliable, and secure services? It's not an easy day to be in IT. I said I come from IT a long time ago, and in those days we were a little bit of an ivory tower. In today, the expectation is, Lisa Schwartz, my business partner, calls it auto-magical, right? It just happens auto-magically, and the reality is it doesn't, right? It may, you know, don't look at the guy behind the curtain. It doesn't happen auto-magically, but it does happen when we have an environment where Dev and Ops are sharing accountabilities and they're sharing knowledge and their practices are being integrated, and that's really what DevOps is all about. So before we turn over to questions, I just wanted to introduce you just to a couple of things. An organization called the DevOps Institute was recently established earlier this year. I'm on the board, as is Lisa and some folks from DevOps.com, and our Board of Regents has some very impressive names from the DevOps community. But, you know, with everything I've just told you about DevOps, what is missing is a single body of knowledge. And I will tell you the truth, I don't think there ever will be a single body of knowledge. The Phoenix Project is great, but it's a novel. And I think that when we get to DevOps, what we're going to see are a lot of different perspectives, but some very common emerging best practices. And how those are captured are different. So the DevOps Institute was established to be able to filter that into some type of standards of practice, being able to capture the best practices, and being able to provide that through training and certification. So DevOps Foundation course was introduced earlier this year. We'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but the DevOps Institute has introduced the first DevOps Foundation certification course. There's a Certified Agile Service Manager course, Certified Agile Process Owner course, and more courses are coming down the pipeline through DOI. DOI is not a training company, but the goal is to be able to establish those standards so that the market understands DevOps sounds great, but now what do I do? So as I mentioned, there is a DevOps Foundation course. It is 16 hours. It's really does cover at a foundational level DevOps vocabulary, values, principles. As I mentioned, that relationship between DevOps, Lean, Agile, and service management, basic principles of DevOps automation, and guidance for nurturing a DevOps culture. And you know, as I said just a few minutes ago, DevOps is not one of these, it's all of these. And so the foundation course is intended to be able to piece those together so that it makes some sense for an organization getting started. Okay, so on that note, Karen, come back to me and tell me what kind of questions we have.
Hi, Jayne. I have questions all over the place for you, so I hope you are rested and ready.
I am.
Okay, and I just wanted to clarify. You had mentioned that there is not a single body of knowledge for DevOps, and you don't expect there to be. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And why was that?
Well, I think the way DevOps has grown is DevOps has grown very different than some of the other frameworks. So if you look at ITIL, where there's 5 books, and you look at project management, PMI, there's the PMBOK, or Prince2 has a body of knowledge. In the DevOps space, DevOps grew as a very much a grassroots movement. I think it sometimes surprises some of the originators of the term at what sort of a phenomenon it's become. But there's so many different aspects to DevOps. There's cultural aspects and automation aspects and certainly practices like continuous delivery. But there's also leveraging Agile and ITSM and Kanban, which are well established. And so trying to pull that all into a single body of knowledge, I think that's a challenge, and I think it's actually very good that we can look at, say, continuous delivery as a practice, but also understand that there's a cultural element, that it doesn't become, if I do this one thing, I have DevOps, I being CIO or the organization, when the reality is it's a little bit of everything. Right, and so part of what DOI is going to do is kind of bring that little bit of everything to make sense, without trying to there's that term, boil the ocean, without trying to boil the ocean.
Right.
It's hot if you boil the ocean, yeah.
Yes, I like that.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth was asking if we had a source for the 6,000 or 8,000 times faster statement, and that's the Puppet Labs document, yes?
Yes, there is, for the last 3 years, I think, there have been 2013, 14, and 15, there is a State of DevOps report published each year. And IT Revolution Press are the publishers of the Phoenix Project. So it's Jayne Kim, if you're familiar with Jayne. Jayne's been an incredible spokesperson and advocate for DevOps, very involved in the DevOps community. Jayne's actually working on a new book, and Lisa can help me with this. It was being called the DevOps Cookbook, but then I heard the name was changing to the DevOps Handbook, and frankly, right now I'm not sure where the titling is coming from. But yes, there's reports that are published every year, and we can certainly in our Q&A provide some links to those.
Yes, and for those of you that are here, it's also, Lisa put it into the chat for you under Puppet Lab, so the link is there for that too, and we will include that in the Q&A as well. So thank you, Jayne, for clarifying that for me.
And Karen, it's Lisa. I'm just going to jump in to say the link that I put in is to the slide share, which is a very nice accumulation of the report. But you can also go, just search, Google it, the Puppet Labs State of DevOps report, and you can then put in your contact detail information and get the report, which I think actually started in 2011 or 2012.
Yeah, I think.
But the slide share, I think, is a really nice, quick shot of the, kind of just as a nice recap of the whole thing. But if you want to see the whole report, then you can easily find that on the Google as well. And yes, it is officially going to be called the Handbook, Jayne, and not the Cookbook. And I think just to clarify a little bit, Jayne isn't saying that there isn't going to be a ton of source material. There's going to be a ton of source material.
Exactly.
She's
Not a
saying
single source.
not a single source that any body of knowledge. Someone is going to come out with a DevOps PMBOK. They will, or a DevOps BOK, right? Because that's kind of what happens. But a single source that the founders of DevOps, they're not going to write a book. So there will be lots of material written. There has been already, and maybe one day, a long time from now, one of those things will bubble up as sort of the single approved source. But it is, it's very different than the rise of other cultural movements, methodologies, whatever we want to call it. And I think that's what Jayne was saying, but I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, and Lisa, yeah, you're exactly right. There are many sources, and almost none are contradictory. It's just they cover different perspectives of aspects. Now, as a practitioner, You know, will you have to read, 100 books to figure out how to do DevOps? No. But there are a lot of good perspectives out there, and as Lisa said, there are already good publications. There's a great publication on continuous delivery, and the Phoenix Project, again, is a starting point, even though it's a novel. Really, I think, helps to bring some ideas into place. It kind of stirs the creative pot, so to speak. So there are already content out there that, depending on the nature of your organization, will be relevant to you. DevOps.com is a content site, and there are many, many authors that contribute at DevOps.com, and each bring a sort of a unique perspective there. So depending on your vertical market or where you are in your journey and what practices you already have, you're likely able to find some of that. But again, DOI's goal is to be able to codify some of those best practices as they've been emerging, so that it isn't necessarily providing a body of knowledge, but it's making sense of the reality of DevOps. So Karen, hit me with some questions.
Okay, here you go. So Charlie has a question for you, and Charlie wants to know, he says he's hearing a lot of different definitions and descriptions of DevOps, and how does he know which one is right?
Well, that's actually a very, very good question. If you look back at the definition that's coming out of DOI, it's a pretty high level definition, because depending on the perspective that you might hear a definition of, some will say it's all about continuous delivery, or some will say it's all about culture, or some will say it's all about automation. And the reality is, as I've said, it's all of the above. So I'm pretty comfortable with the DOI definition, which is it's cultural and professional first, right? And then it stresses communication, collaboration, integration, and that means that you're going to improve that flow of work. You're going to encourage feedback between Dev and Ops. You're going to integrate the practices, integrate the automation. So some of the practices that have emerged, I just mentioned chat ops. Right, where chat rooms are left open so that Dev and Ops can communicate with each other real time when necessary, depending on what's going on. Collaboration, where operational folks are participating in Agile Scrum teams, or automation, where you have configuration management tools on the development side and configuration management tools on the operational side, and being able to bridge those as well, or monitoring, or dashboards, or all sorts of automation capabilities that each invested in separately, and then are trying to bring those together. So from a definition perspective, Charlie, I actually think this one, while it's fairly high level, sort of covers the scope of what DevOps is.
Thank you, Jayne.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Jake is asking, how can ITIL be used with DevOps and vice versa? So, what is the relationship between the two?
Well, and I think I spoke to it a little bit already. Everything that IT does, everything, whether you're in development, whether you're in operations, is underpinned by process. And so while we sometimes look at service management as a thing, the reality is change management or release management really extends into development, or demand management when we're strategizing capacity, and that's of course being considered in development as well. And what happens after production, incident management, problem management, all of those processes are absolutely necessary, not only just to DevOps, they're just necessary to IT. So the relationship between DevOps and ITIL is very, very strong, because it's the ITIL processes that are going to provide that path for the flow of work. Now, the challenge and the analysis that has to be done is, what about those processes work, and what about those processes that maybe need to be scaled? In Agile, we use the term just enough, scaled to a just enough place so that that path is very clear, and it isn't very complex. And of course, that depends on the nature of the release. And so I think what's going to happen in ITIL is that, or in IT service management, is what we're going to see is the value of those processes are going to increase as long as we collaborate with dev in terms of how to make those processes more valuable. I just want to say, one of the reasons that dev hasn't really embraced ITIL, and sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect there, is in service design. Service design is a great book, right? So we have service strategy, and we talk about all the strategic aspects of a service, and then we go into designing it with availability and capacity and security, continuity. And then in ITIL it says, and go off and use the software development lifecycle approach of your choice. So ITIL recognizes that there are frameworks such as Agile or Waterfall or Extreme Programming or, pick any of the above, that developers use as part of their daily practice. But the relationship between that and service design, transition, and operation wasn't always very clear. And so I think that part of what DevOps will do will be to create that bridge between the software development lifecycle approaches and the management of services. I don't want to use ITSM or ITIL, the management of services, so that we all start to kind of share that similar mindset. We all need to be agile, and we all need to manage services.
Exactly. We had a question from Paul that was around that. I just wanted to just ask this of Paul. Your question was, how does DevOps relate to the ITIL phases of service design and transition? And so Jayne really just spoke to that. And if you have any other specific questions about that, just let us know. Just chat that back in. Okay, Jayne, are you ready for another one?
I am.
Okay, now this one is from Sean. And Sean said, we're a very large organization, and many parts of IT are in different countries or done through outsourcers. Can we reasonably do DevOps?
I will say yes. There have been many case studies that have started to emerge from large enterprises that have started to share some of their practices. There are challenges, obviously, as described in the question. Geographical challenges, certainly potentially a supply chain that consists of different organizations. But the common goal is the same, right? The common goal is the same. So part of the collaboration, communication, integration, whether it's process, practice, or tools, has to be looking at the end-to-end delivery pipeline and understanding how that will play out in a faster environment. So and again, there's great articles out there about enterprise DevOps. One of the goals of the DevOps Institute is to really bring enterprise-grade knowledge to the larger organizations that, as I just said, didn't really build their models with DevOps in their DNA. So it's not impossible, and it can start very gradually. I think enterprise IT didn't think that DevOps was relevant because they don't release 50 times a day, and the reality is it's all about increasing your release cycle, and I think enterprise IT wants that, and so it's really kind of looking at the constraints. There's a concept in the Phoenix Project called the theory of constraints, and it actually comes out of the book The Goal, and it travels into the concept of the Phoenix Project, but essentially says once you identify constraints, if you improve the constraints, the entire system works better. And so whether you're a large organization or small organization, you're still navigating through a system. So in a large organization, you probably just have a few more constraints, and the first step is just to start to analyze those and identify where those constraints exist. And in some cases, it may be to automate the mitigation of those constraints. And again, it really depends on the scope and reach of that supply chain. At the end of the day, everyone in the supply chain is trying to reach that same goal, which is deliver services faster. Systems engineering. I guess that's, if I had to sum it up, that's really what you're talking about. What does your system look like, and where are there constraints in that system?
Thank you, Jayne. Lisa wants to pop in.
Sorry, yeah.
Come on in.
I'm jumping in again to say that the core of the knowledge in the Phoenix Project is the concept of the 3 ways, and I just put into the chat window a link to a blog article which was a reinterpretation of the 3 ways that Jayne Kim, who is the primary author of the Phoenix Project, was completely amazed and happy with. So I just threw that in the chat window for everyone as well, because that is, again, the core knowledge and kind of the actionable items that you can take after reading that book come from the knowledge of the 3 ways.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, Jayne, you ready for another?
I am.
I know that you had brought up that slide about DevOps and Agile and Lean, but Drew's asking if you can just speak a little bit more about the relationship between the 3.
Okay, well, again, we know that Agile software development has improved the development team's ability to potentially release faster. So if you're familiar with Agile and Scrum, first of all, the concept of being Agile, right? The concept of being able to look at what really counts and individuals and interactions, working software, right? Good collaboration, responding to change. All of that kind of sits at the heart of Agile. And as part of that, developers have invested in moving away from a waterfall approach to development where everything's very linear to an Agile approach where everything's very iterative, right? So you do small, frequent, potential releases, right? Doesn't mean you have to release, but potential releases, and you progress your product forward by building it a little bit at a time. And that little bit of a time certainly has the ability to be released if that makes sense, right? So small, frequent releases is a big part of it. And DevOps, of course, because DevOps is focusing on going faster, is very, very reliant on Agile software development, as is continuous delivery, right? You can't continuously deliver if you're not starting to build in an iterative and incremental way with small, faster releases. And as I've said already, we do still need those underpinning processes of change management and release management, incident management, problem management, all of the service management processes in order for those small, faster releases just to be able to follow that path, fairly quickly and with some risk management and risk analysis associated with that. And then lean. DevOps equals efficiencies. And so you don't want to be so lean you're mean, but the ability to identify where there's waste in that delivery pipeline and where there's defects that are resulting from some of that waste is critical as well. So DevOps sits on top of all of these practices. And, and as I said before, I think one of the primary goals of DevOps is to connect the dots between them. Now, do you have to have fully mature Agile or fully mature continuous delivery or fully mature ITIL or IT service management or lean to have DevOps? No. You can grow them up together so that you can look at and adapt the best of what you need there in order to move forward. But most organizations have some level, differing levels of maturity, but most organizations have some level of this that they can start to leverage in a DevOps way, because the part that's not on here is just the cultural commitment to start thinking and behaving a different way as well. And so while it leverages all of these best practices, you have to add the extra ingredient of culture and behavior and commitment in order to be able to do this. Unlike some other frameworks, DevOps, as I said before, is very grassroots. So you can have a developer and an operations person sit over a sandwich and share knowledge about Agile software development or a service management process or how dashboards work. So all of these play a part in that recipe.
Thank you, Jayne. I have a couple more questions from Paul. One is he's just asking for clarification. Isn't DevOps a way to develop applications, services that applies rapid application development techniques to IT services in general?
Well, yes. I mean, rapid application technique is important. I forget what they call it, RAD, rapid application development, um, is certainly a key aspect of it, but it's not enough. And I think that's part of the I use the term recipe. It's part of the recipe, and it's one of the reasons. Lisa mentioned the 3 ways. It's one of the reasons that when the Phoenix Project looks at the 3 ways, or when we start to look at definitions of DevOps, we don't focus specifically on one aspect of it, right? Which is, in this case, would be the development aspect of it. For those of you who haven't read the Phoenix Project, just to summarize the 3 ways, the first way is to increase flow, right? So the ability to flow the delivery pipeline from development through operations and into production, and increasing that flow is very important. And the second way is shortening feedback loops, so that through smaller, faster releases, through better collaboration, through shared practices, the feedback that occurs between dev and ops, and of course between customers and IT, needs to be shortened and improved as well, right? So that's the second way. And the third way is being comfortable with experimentation and failing fast, so making yourself a learning environment. And so I bring that up because none of those 3 ways are grounded in a particular software development lifecycle approach. It doesn't say increase flow through Agile or rapid application development or extreme programming. Those are all great practices that sit behind it, but it's not enough, right? It has to be all of those 3 ways. There has to be an improvement of flow, so we remove constraints. There has to be shortened feedback loops, so that we can continually improve, and certainly there has to be more comfort with more risk, right? But the ability to be able to respond to that.
Thank you, Jayne. And Paul's on the ITIL side of things, and he's asking, where is the value of DevOps for him?
For ITIL,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny. There's so many. As Lisa said, there's so many different sources of information, some of which say that DevOps signals the death of ITIL, and I will tell you unequivocally that's not true. I can actually demonstrate that DevOps improves the relevancy of ITIL and IT service management, because as I've said several times already, how can you do this? This is not the Wild West. DevOps does not imply that we discard practice, that we discard process. And despite what may be apparent on the Agile Manifesto, that also is not advocating that process and tools and documentations and contracts and plans are not important. What it is saying is that we improve the relevancy of all of that by scaling them down to the level that we need. And what we need depends on what we're doing and what we're doing today and next month and the nature of our organization, but it's making service management more agile so that we can adapt those processes to the changing needs of the business. Nowhere in 2,000 pages of ITIL does it say make your processes complex and bureaucratic. And nowhere in DevOps does it say that you don't need underpinning processes to help this delivery pipeline move faster. We just need to make sure those processes, like everything else that ITIL and ITSM advocates, meet the needs of customers and the business. And so it may be an analysis of ITIL or IT service management processes that need to be done to see if they are indeed agile enough to be able to be relevant, and maybe there's some scaling that's associated. But again, how can you do this with without some type of a release management process? It needs to be adapted to current culture. I call it modernized. It may need to be modernized based on the current needs of your organization, but you don't want to discard those. You want them to be relevant. The other thing I want to say, and my poor scribe, I'm sorry that I'm kind of waxing poetic on this, but the other thing that I want to say is, there's all this discussion about continuous, right? Continuous delivery and continuous testing and continuous deployment, and those are really important. But let's not forget that ITIL originated the concept of continuous in the service management space with what's now called continual service improvement. And so continual service improvement may mean that service management processes now are built or adapted to enable continuous delivery or continuous testing or continuous deployment, so that we've now matched the management of today's services, which may be different than the management of yesterday's services. But it does not signal the death of this, and it does not supersede the need to manage services. IT will always need to manage its services, right? And so every one of those processes will still stay relevant. Okay, stepping off the soapbox now.
Thank you, Jayne.
I'm very passionate about that, not only because, I mean, you know, obviously ITSM Academy and I'm an ITIL expert, but it's naive for anyone in a DevOps mindset to think that they can do this without. The problem is, let me just share the problem. The problem is, you know, as I said, IT, we love our frameworks, right? And we're very loyal to our frameworks. And so we're loyal to Agile or Scrum, and we're loyal to ITIL and ITSM, and you know, there's a loyalty now to this new emerging DevOps. But sometimes it becomes a little religious. And the reality is that DevOps, and I said this before, is really intended to bridge all of the best of Agile and Lean and ITIL and ITSM and create a framework that's unique to your organization and takes the relevancy of each of those, which are not the same, right? Agile is not the same as ITIL, and ITIL is not the same as Lean, but taking the best of those and creating a framework that works for your organization. Okay, I had one foot still on the soapbox, so now I'm standing.
Thank you, Jayne. No, that was great. It's good information. We all want to hear it. We're getting a lot of very specific questions as well now. I still have a lot of questions here, and I just want to say it's a minute till noon, and I know that some of you do need to drop off, so I'd just like to remind you that our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, November 19th, when Donna Knapp of ITSM Academy, she's our Curriculum Development Manager, she's going to be joining us, and her presentation is titled The Agile Process Owner. And she says today's IT organizations must be built on ITSM processes and policies that facilitate speed to change. So who ensures that ITSM processes are designed with just enough control, as Jayne was talking about earlier, just enough, to meet the organization's needs? A process owner is accountable for the performance of a process and for ensuring it delivers value to its stakeholders. But how can process owners keep up with stakeholders' constantly changing requirements? This session describes process owner responsibilities in the context of Agile service management and introduces ways that process owners can adapt Agile and Scrum values and practices to ITSM processes and process design and improvement activities. The new certified Agile process to owner role is introduced along with tips for creating and maintaining a process backlog. So we hope that you can join us for that. Okay, Jayne, that was a little break for you and our friend, our scribe.
I'm ready.
Okay, so just, you know, we were talking about Agile versus DevOps, right, and how you really can't do one without the other. But then Sean came in, and Sean just asked specifically which ITIL processes are important to DevOps. Do you want to just speak a minute to that?
Sure. I mean, I would turn the question around a little bit and say, which ITIL processes do you think is not important to DevOps, right? So, so for example, could we now remember, DevOps, let's just take away the term for a second. All DevOps means is DevOps equals IT, right? Because, you know, add some security and you've got, whoops, sorry, wrong one. You've got all of IT. So first of all, you know, without trying to be snarky about it, the first question has to be which one would we like not to use. But, you know, clearly there are some processes that are much more relevant, you know, change management, but change management has to be very agile. So a once-a-week cab or, you know, an extensive requirement that you submit a change 7 days or 7 months in advance and all of that may not necessarily work here. You know, release management, the ability to have release policies and looking at your release policy and assessing whether it meets the current requirements of your organization. And again, those requirements may be different from service to service, so not having a one-size-fits-all, that certain services, like your web services, may require more of a faster release cycle than some of your other services. Your CRM may not have the same release requirements as some of your web services. I'm running out of words, right? So it's really kind of looking at processes like that. It's looking at processes like demand management, which is a process that a lot of organizations really haven't invested in, or capacity management. The move to the cloud certainly has made capacity and availability, continuity processes important. And they don't have to be big processes. It could be some of those processes are very, very simple, minimum viable process, just to be able to mature it in today's world in a different way. So if you don't have a release management process, DevOps is a great opportunity to start that, and start it really, really simply, right? Again, when we look at waterfall approaches, for those of you who are not developers, waterfall starts at the top, and we work our way through scope requirements and design capabilities, and the development, and user acceptance and testing and training, and blah blah blah. And we actually don't get feedback till the end. And coming down the waterfall is one thing, going back up the waterfall is a different. So in a release management environment, that may be a very different release management process than what you need to build for a delivery pipeline looking at continuous delivery. So certainly release management is important. Incident management, the third way is to fail fast. Well, if you fail fast, that's an incident. And so being able to look at your incident management process and being able to look at your monitoring, so you can identify if something's been released that needs to be withdrawn, or there's something that the service desk needs to do in order to be aware of that. Looking at practices like chat ops as part of incident management, where there's almost instant access to a developer if we've identified an incident resulting from a change. So the processes are still important. Looking at processes like configuration management and figuring out how to marry that to the configuration management of developers. Looking at service level management, and when it goes into production, making sure we can still achieve those service levels. Again, I can't say it enough. The key is the processes are all relevant. At what level of process are you at? A minimum viable process? Again, this concept of Agile, Karen just mentioned, is just enough process, right? You want to have just enough process. Not too much, not too little. You want to have just enough process. And figuring out where just enough lives in an Agile service management world is something that just requires some analysis and, more importantly, some collaboration. Talk to your developers. Find out what their definition of just enough is, right? Just enough to them may be no process, but that's not reasonable. Right? You can't do this without process, and you can't do this. So again, I think all the processes are important. Clearly there are some, and there may be some you've already invested in, some that are more important than others. Change, release, incident, problem, configuration.
I like your phrase, Jayne. Be lean, not mean.
Be lean, not mean.
Right, I like that one. We have a couple of questions on continuous releases and continuous delivery. And Jenny has a question. And she says, how can you have continuous releases if CAB requires that all changes be submitted 48 hours in advance?
Well, and that's a great question, because that really illustrates what I was just trying to point out.
Mm-hmm.
One size fits all approach to, say, change management may not work in a DevOps world. Right? It may be that change can only be submitted 5 minutes after it was released, or your definition of a standard change is adapted. Right? So if you have automated testing, which is it has to be a key aspect of some of the DevOps pieces, and your small frequent releases are treated differently than your big, major releases. Are treated very differently, and your definition of a standard change and a standard release has to be reassessed. And part of that's on risk, part of that's on need. So you look at organizations that do release multiple times a day, and sometimes that release is really 3, 4, 5 lines of code. You can't put that in 48 hours in advance. It may be adapting to something that's happening in your web presence or in an app that you're working on. So some of those policies need to be reviewed for when they're still relevant and where they may need to be adapted to that. But it can't be a one-size-fits-all.
Well, and Sandy had a question and commented on that as well. She said, as you stated earlier, is the identification of standard changes by development a key component to keeping those low risk, low impact, repeatable by definition changes more agile and faster to bundle/release? Is her question, and then her comment was lead time is quite relevant for those changes that are more complex and higher risk and higher visibility, have higher visibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, the word change can have so many different meanings depending on what you're changing. And by the way, some of those small frequent releases are not necessarily low risk. Some of them are high risk. And the third way says we have to learn to fail fast and recover from it. So some of it is reliance on automation. We have to be comfortable with being able to put some of those fast little pieces of code into production, first sending it through some type of testing protocol, usually again through automation, and it's a fast pipeline from coder to production. You send it into this automation, and next thing you know, it's in production. That's not necessarily low risk, but it's a risk that the business has to be able to assume, and IT has to be able to adapt to that. That if it's going to fail, it's going to fail fast. And practices like DevOps or ChatOps or an integration between Dev and Ops. Dev can't say, hey, we did our stuff and that's operations fault, and Ops can't turn around and point a finger at Dev. There's a shared accountability that when it goes into, the rocket ship into production, that everybody's aware and monitors it, and metrics are taken and dashboards are adapted, and that if it is going to fail, it's pulled right out. But again, it's not a one-size-fits-all, and that may not be able to require 48 hours advance notice. It may just be constantly adapting to what's happening on your website or in a service.
Right, depending on the urgency, sure.
Yeah, and I know that's a little scary because it is a different approach, but that's where, again, I encourage you to read the Phoenix Project. That whole concept of being comfortable with experimentation. Some of you may know about Chaos Monkey. Netflix invented the Simian Army, where they literally send out disruptors into their environment on a regular basis, almost as kind of field tests to be able to manage against that, so that if something does get released into production that fails fast, they're already equipped, they're trained to be able to identify and remove it. Do you want the Chaos Monkey in your environment? I'm tempted to do it.
Exactly. Lisa wants to come in, and she wants to comment, and I believe she wants to comment on Jenny's question. And the question, Lisa, was how can you have continuous releases if CAB requires that all changes be submitted 48 hours in advance? So come on in.
Come on in.
Thank you.
Stay with me.
I'm in. So really just expanding on what Jayne said. Look, we're not tool experts. We don't pretend to be tool experts, but there have been some new tools that have been developed and released around continuous flow and continuous deployment in the last 18 months in particular that have been some serious game changers. So we're not, Jayne's much more equipped than I am to talk about the tools and technologies, but it's a whole brand new way of thinking with these tools. And so I think I know when I was first embracing DevOps, which now for us has been many, many years, but those were kind of the questions that I had. I just didn't understand the how you would go from a strong ITIL shop to this whole DevOps concepts. I mean, I understand the 3 ways and the flow, and you can use that methodology anywhere. You can use it for your marketing plan. That's just good business process improvement that happens to be the core of the Phoenix project. But if you're, and never go the tool first, but if you're a little confused about a question like Jenny's, which Jayne answered very well, which is some do, some don't. But I think that there are some real game changers in tools, and if your organization is really looking at DevOps, words I've never said before, but make sure to include the tools and their capabilities into your plan. Don't build your plan based on a single vendor's tool, but there's some stuff out there that's going to blow your mind, and I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I agree with you, Lisa. There's some, and some of those are almost like middleware tools where they improve the speed and the ability of reporting or chatting or just help move things along the pipeline. And you're right. I mean, it's just been remarkable watching kind of the emergence of tools to meet these requirements, particularly when we're looking at staging environments or continuous delivery or unit testing or things like that. It's really just been kind of fascinating to watch that, and in some cases it's a little bit of a patchwork, right? Blow your mind. I like it.
Right, and remember the very first DevOps days that we went to, which was like, what, 2012? We walked out of there just saying, I've never heard so many words I didn't know before. The tools and the technology and we're so kind of used to going to ITSM conferences, and so I remember we spent the entire plane rides home like on our iPad doing all this research on all this new stuff that we learned. But it's a brand new world, and it's very, very exciting because it's a brand new world that is being built to help the communication between Dev and Ops. So it's there is a lot to learn, and back to what Jayne was saying originally, why we think there won't be a single source for a long time is because, to be really honest, a lot of this is being driven by dev, and those dev are developers, and those developers are building tools. And so a lot of the growth has come through what the breakthroughs in technology and what tools will allow coders to do. So when we're talking about, X amount of releases in a day, and I did just put in a link for everyone to the Chaos Monkey article, because that's, when you read that, I think some more of this will kind of make sense to you. But it's these are not your grandmother's tools. So again, it's a brand new world out there and some very exciting stuff, but it really does take a change in thinking and a change in being willing to change your culture. And I think that's where you started, Jayne.
Yeah, and I said it, even looking at source, who's the audience, right? Who are you speaking to? I mean, part of what we're going to try to achieve in DevOps is creating a language that both Dev and Ops understand. But some of the source materials will speak more to Dev, and some will speak more to Ops, and some will speak hopefully to the DevOps spectrum. But yeah, you're right, Lisa. I mean, these are not your grandmother's tools, and a lot of the developers have been looking at automation, and automation is so important here because you can't go fast or faster unless you leverage some of the capabilities of the innovations in technology. But you can't rely on that alone. And again, I mean, I said I'm an old IT person. Our first strategy is to buy something. And in this case, again,
you'd have heard me laugh if I wasn't on mute.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, okay, there's a tool for that. And the answer is it does require first just a commitment to do that. And by the way, from going to DevOps conferences and DevOps days and all of that, it's not like Dev and Ops don't want to do it, right? If you ask individual developers and operational folks, they actually want this. They want it because it will make their lives easier. Maybe not in the short term, but in the long term, because everybody wants to be successful and nobody wants to bang their head against the wall, right? So a developer that develops something and runs into a constraint just at the gateway of transition is banging their head against the wall, and the operator who receives something into production without any communication, documentation, understanding of how to resolve an incident, and a resource to turn to is also banging their head against the wall. And unfortunately, they're banging their head against the same wall, right? But they're not communicating to each other. So it's not like there's a resistance in IT. There are pockets of resistance, but on an individual basis, I think everyone gets it. It's just, how do we do this in the most logical way that gives us a return? And it's not something that happens overnight, right? CIOs want it, devs want it, ops wants it. Some of the line managers may struggle with it, and again, we have to kind of give up our loyalties to a particular framework that one's better than the other or whatever. It's really just, let's get together and figure out what really works.
And in the DevOps world, there's a lot of conversation about unicorns and horses, and that came from, the first companies that were talking about, amazing numbers of releases were the Netflix of this world, and very sort of web product companies like Etsy. And so there's a DevOps Enterprise Summit, which we're actually attending next week, and I put the link, the chat, into the chat for that as well. At the DevOps Enterprise Summit, DevOps.com has a television booth, and we'll be interviewing all the speakers. So the speakers work for some unicorns, but they also work for some horses, which don't really love that expression. And those are more of, looking down the list, and we know a lot of the folks who are on the call with us today, a lot of you guys are alumni, a lot of you are not development shops per se. You're much more of what we would consider IT service management, and your organizations have been run that way. And this conference is for you guys. It's talking about DevOps at an enterprise level for other organizations who aren't Netflix and Etsy. And as I said, DevOps.com is going to be interviewing all the speakers as they come off stage. There's going to just be a ton of content on DevOps.com next week. So if you're still kind of struggling with, this all sounds great, but this is for a Netflix, how would this apply for us? I work for a Florida, for a department of Florida State, Sandy, and a lot of other folks that we recognize. Well, coming out of these interviews and all this content that's going to be up next week can help answer some of those questions for you guys.
Thank you, Lisa. Jayne, you ready for another question?
Sure.
Okay, and Jayne, how much time do you have today? I just don't want to...
Well, how much time do you need?
Well, we're 12:20 and we still have some people on listening. So
if everyone wants to hang out, let's take it to the half an hour.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Greg is asking, is there a place for DevOps in an infrastructure IT shop where there is no development or very little development going on?
Meaning that Karen, I'll ask you, and I'll make an assumption, and Greg, if I'm not assuming correctly, please chat on in. So most of the products are commercial off the shelf, so there's not a lot of internal development happening. But somewhere along the way, and again, Greg, if that's not a good assumption, then please just give me a little bit more information. But for argument's sake, let's start there and see where we end. So a lot of organizations don't do development, right? They don't have developers per se. They don't write their own software. They buy software from providers and work with them. But somewhere along the way, whatever you've purchased has to be adapted to your environment, even in a cloud environment, right? There are some people that believe that cloud took away the need for DevOps because we're not hosting our own infrastructures anymore. But the reality is somewhere along the way that those services are being released to you. And so the definition of dev, in my mind, in that environment, may be a little different than having 20 20 developers that are sitting in a room, whether it's here, or, in Ireland or India or wherever else around the world. That's that may seem like a different definition, but somewhere along the way, you are having services released to you. And so how that release cycle occurs, whether it's behind the curtain in the cloud world and then into production for you, still has to have somewhat of a DevOps spin. I mean, there are many that believe the migration to the cloud actually drove DevOps, because our expectation of the delivery of services in the cloud is much higher than the expectation of the delivery of services in an internal infrastructure. So it's adapting your definition of DevOps for, call it cloud ops, call it whatever you want, brand it however you want, but you're still being released to. And you still have some type of an operational aspect, even if you're not managing the infrastructure or the actual development. Your cloud provider certainly should be, if they have not already, instilling a DevOps culture, because that's the only way they can get services out to you. But there still is a release cycle somewhere in there, and whether you're managing it as an account manager or you're managing it in another way, it is a cultural change for your organization. And unless you don't have an IT department, which again, maybe you don't, I don't many of others, but unless you don't have an IT department at all, some aspect of DevOps, which is the IT supply chain, is going to have some relevance. I see something in the chat, Karen, that seems pretty detailed. Oh, that's from Lisa. Okay.
Yes.
So anyhow, so I said I don't know if I answered Greg's question completely. It's a little bit of what happens behind the cloud curtain and what happens in front of the cloud curtain. Behind the cloud curtain, the cloud provider, whether it's a private cloud or an internal, if it's an internal cloud, that's a whole different story. But if it's a private cloud or if it's something along those lines, then certainly they're managing, they have to be managing in a DevOps space. I'll tell you just a very fast, funny story. I was at a software providers conference a little over a year ago, and I actually went, I'll be very honest with you, I went because somebody I knew was going, and the musical entertainment the night of the conference party was Journey, and I happen to like Journey. So I was able to go, and I was sitting in the opening keynote with the CEO and all those other folks, and I really didn't expect much in terms of DevOps or ITIL or anything else. And they were just moving to the cloud, and the COO got up and was describing the fact that they were going to migrate a lot of their services to the cloud. And right up there on the screen was a graphic, and the first box on the graphic said the first thing we did was we initiated a DevOps program. And of course, my mouth dropped to the floor. I said, "Oh, Journey and DevOps, awesome! I mean, that's the perfect combination." And hopefully you're all chuckling a little bit, but the cloud providers have to be moving towards a DevOps culture. And again, that word culture is so nebulous, right? But moving towards a DevOps environment where Dev and Ops understand they're in the game together. As a customer of the cloud, first of all, you want to be the recipient of that. But I said, unless you don't have an IT department at all, your dev is happening behind the cloud curtain, and your ops, maybe it's not infrastructure ops, but your ops is happening at the business level. So again, Greg, if I didn't answer that, just please chime in a little bit more, and I'll kind of readdress it.
Thank you, Jayne. I've got a question for you from Dave, and Dave wants to know what type of training is available around DevOps.
Oh, good question. So as I mentioned before, whoops, let me go up. Whoops. I don't know, up from down. So there is a DevOps Foundation course. It is available through ITSM Academy. It has become the international standard for foundational level knowledge for DevOps. Like ITIL Foundation or other foundational courses, it's really meant to level set some of the knowledge around DevOps and really connect the dots. So first of all, looking at a DevOps vocabulary, and a lot of that is an integration of what we know about DevOps and pieces of ITIL and Agile and Lean and Kanban, and making sure that learners are comfortable with what those concepts are and how they apply to DevOps and certainly how they apply to IT. Looking at what the values and practices of DevOps are. Those, again, continuous integration, continuous delivery, really the marriage of Agile and ITIL and Lean and DevOps in terms of the 3 ways is addressed there. Lisa had mentioned the 3 ways is certainly brought out in the foundation class as well. Looking at the principles of automation, so not specifically looking at, there are great tools, Jenkins, Docker. I mean, you might have heard of some of those. Those are pretty prominent right now, but there's a host of others, as Lisa said, not your grandmother's technology, but really looking at the principles that sit behind a DevOps tool chain and the importance of automation and the importance of building a tool chain that will allow you to do faster releases, however you define faster. And then really good guidance for the organizational change aspects of creating a DevOps culture and how that can be done on an individual level, certainly on an organizational level, and looking at increasing organizational agility so that IT is equipped, both Dev and Ops are equipped with metrics and shared accountabilities and some practical approaches to how do we start this this journey. It is accredited by the DevOps Institute. As I mentioned, DevOps Institute was launched this year. There is a certification exam that accompanies this, very similar to an ITIL Foundation certification exam. And I believe our next course, which is a virtual course, and Lisa and Karen can chime in, I believe it's November 16th. So if you're interested in learning more about that or taking it, please reach out and we'll be happy to give you more information about it. And others are coming. Yeah, other training is coming. There's, Karen, do you want me to talk a little bit about like Certified Agile Service Manager and CAPA? So the other side of the equation is I've mentioned Agile several times, and if you know anything about Agile training, most of it is still focused on development. So Certified Scrum Master, I'm a Certified Scrum Master, Lisa's a Certified Scrum Master. Still has a little bit of a development spin to it. So on the operational side, DevOps Institute introduced the Certified Agile Service Manager certification, and also available through ITSM Academy. And that's really I like to think of it as the modern service manager. I'm a B2 ITIL service manager, and making service management more agile, the concept of agile service management, agile process design, instilling agile values. You learn as much Scrum in CASM as you would learn in a Certified Scrum Master class, but with more of a service management operational spin to it. So really great course. I confess that the Agile Service Management Guide was written by a very, very brilliant author. Her name is Jayne Groll. But I would encourage you to look into that because it really does bring ITIL and Agile together. And then I think it was mentioned before, Karen mentioned Certified Agile Process Owner. Looking at process ownership, there hasn't been training to date on what it means to be a process owner, and CAPO, Certified Agile Process Owner, is really about being a process owner in an Agile world. And how do you manage a process backlog, and how do you adapt some of the concepts that have really been successful in product management? How do we adapt that to process ownership? So that's a great course, new course. Very, very excited about that.
And Jayne, I'm going to jump in just to say that the DevOps Foundation class, the next one is, if you were correct, virtual classroom, November 16th through 19th. And we will make this offer that anyone who registers for that class, we will also issue a free seat for a team member in DevOps Overview. And so once you register for the foundation class, there's a place on the website to add comments. Please just say, per webinar, I'd like the code for a free DevOps Overview seat. That's also a virtual class. It's 4 hours. We run them basically once a month. And there's my gift for our attendees that hung with us for this long today.
Yeah, nice. What
Thank you,
else you
Lisa.
got, Miss Karen?
I'm sorry, Jane?
So what else you got?
I have more questions, actually. You want to continue? It's about 12:32. We still have a few people on here. And Sandy actually has a great question here. She said a huge misconception of dev is that change management should not be involved or notified of changes until build design UAT testing is complete. She said this definitely holds up releases when change management isn't aware of changes earlier in the process. How do we change that culture?
That's, and Sandy, that's a great question, and it's funny because I always I always suggest something that I always think is so simple, and that's put an operational person on your Scrum team if you're doing Agile software development. There's some misbelief that operational folks don't belong in a developer's team, but there's so much that operational person could be doing to prepare the production environment, the testing environment in order to be able to do that. And that operational person can also be charged with communicating through the change management process for what's going on. Again, we know that software development is moving towards an Agile Scrum approach. It may be in some aspects of the sprint a passive role, in some aspects of a sprint maybe a very active role, but somehow there's this misbelief that Scrum teams are only development focused. So there's certainly one suggestion of that. The other suggestion that I always make is just look at your change management process, and more importantly, look at the categories of change and identify, are there opportunities to either redefine some standard changes so that it's not necessarily last minute, or to improve the ability for developers to submit that, even though at the very beginning they don't have a lot of knowledge. And I think that's been a part of the challenge, is that in the early stages of development, I know that as a content developer, where I know our operational team wants a lot of information about what we're doing, and at that point we just have really just some ideas. So we don't necessarily know all of the details, and there's this misbelief again that we don't fill it out until we really know what a date and what it is and what the scope is and some of the technology details. So it's a very, very similar approach. So again, just to sum it up, see if you can get an ops person on your Scrum teams. Again, I can't emphasize how important I think that would be. Stranger in a strange land, perhaps, but I think that would be really important. Look at your definitions of standard changes and identify if there are some categories of change that can be considered standard that maybe weren't before. And then also look at the change management process in terms of is there kind of an early request for change that gets completed as you're moving closer to the actual deployment, and how do you improve that communication?
Thank you, Jane.
Jane, that is, I'm so sorry, Karen, I'm misinterrupting you today, but I'm so passionate about the topic.
Just join me as an expert, Lise, really.
Right, that's an excellent point. And to Greg's question in particular, we don't necessarily have traditional dev here at the Academy. We use a lot of different software that's in the cloud, et cetera, but we have absolutely taken the best practices from the Certified Scrum Master class, which many of us have attended, through the CASM class, which is the Certified Agile Service Manager, which all of us have attended, through DevOps Foundation, and we've applied them across the board, particularly the Agile and Scrum methodologies, to what we do, which is develop content and deliver excellent training, right? So from the marketing teams to the content development teams, we've taken the best of the best and applied it to our own organization. So, we're using Kanban boards. We're running development. In our world, development is content development. We're running that in sprints. We're running our marketing campaigns in sprints now. So, this, even if you're not a development organization per se, all of this knowledge is just good business process management at its core, and it is applicable to anything that you develop and release inside of your organization. And every organization, no matter what you do at some level, if you provide a product or a service, you're developing and releasing.
And facing some of the same, same challenges, going back to Sandy's question, where, on the ops side, they need the knowledge in order to be able to move forward, and on the dev side, you're sort of in still that creativity cycle. And so the answer is, I mean, in our world, we develop just a couple of very simple documents that are filled out along the way. And so, for example, we don't know what the final curriculum is going to look like. We don't know what the agenda is going to look like probably till the end, because like software development, content development is messy. But we can provide information on who the intended audience is, what the scope of materials, how we're scoping it from a time perspective. So there's a lot of information we do have at the beginning. We just don't have all of it. And the same thing with developers. There's a lot of information they have at the beginning. It just isn't congealed yet. It isn't, it isn't baked. And so there, again, misbelief that we don't give it to you until it's fully baked. And the answer is it could be baked a little bit along the way. Right? While it's still in the creativity cycle, let's, allow ops to do some preparatory work so that when you're ready to release, everybody's very well prepared.
Thank you, ladies. Jayne, Eric would like to come in and speak to our audience today.
Hi, Eric.
Hey, Jayne, and thanks, Karen, and thanks, Jayne, for being. Thank you very much for being here with us today. A lot of great knowledge came from today's webinar, and especially you were talking about how DevOps improves upon ITIL. Making service management more agile is actually really exciting to me, and drawing connections between continual service improvement and continuous delivery made me want to speak about something really big happening here at the Academy. I just wanted to take a moment to let everyone know that we here at the Academy have opened up a new fall lifecycle sale. It's buy one, get one free on all lifecycle courses with the coupon code FALLBOGO on our website. Lifecycle courses are a great way to get a lot of ITIL knowledge in a shorter period of time, either in compressed amount of days or through half days. This is a really big offer, so it's only going out to our webinar attendees currently, and then going out live to a larger audience probably today or tomorrow. So I want you guys to get the first crack at the classes and definitely take advantage of it while it's still available. If you have any questions about the sale or about anything at all, send us an email to info@itsmacademy.com. I look forward to seeing you all in class.
That's great, Eric, and the code is FALLBOGO, FALLBOGO.
Yes.
Perfect. Wow, thank you.